age is nothing but a number. I'm delighted to be joined for this episode by Georgina Halford-Hall, who is, you said I should say it, so 60 and you know, a big milestone, but also in her daily life is Chief Executive of WhistleblowersUK. Welcome, and I mean, you said that you know, 60 you felt was kind of a milestone. You know, why is 60 a milestone? Why does it make a difference?
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me, and I'm delighted to talk about this. I never thought I'd ever find myself saying I'm delighted to be talking about being 60, because I had this preconceived idea that being 60 was like, I suppose, like being 21. That impact that something happens. Now at 21, the only thing that happened was I had a massive hangover the next day. It wasn't the only occasion, admittedly. And I have to say, after my 60th birthday, the following morning, I had a bit of a hangover as well. There's a theme here, isn't there? But I approached 60 with trepidation. I was thinking, you know, this is the sort of downhill slope. But over the last year, so many things have happened. You know, working with me, we've had the whistleblowing bill backing out of Parliament. We've been super busy, thousands and thousands of pieces of email and inquiries about the work that we do, offering support to whistleblowers, offering support to parliamentarians, working with regulators. I have been working harder than ever. I've actually lost weight this year, but it's nothing to do with not eating. I think it's just that the sort of the frantic energy and momentum that's happened. And the other thing I discovered is nobody cares. There's the whole sort of almost like a brick wall, or to use the Game of Thrones, you know, the wall that I thought I was approaching is not there. I haven't found any prejudice. Nobody said, you know, oh, you better slow down, dear. I did get offered a seat on the train the other day, but I think that's because I had a heavy bag. I don't know. Well, I hope that's all it was. Well, they probably thought I'm fat and pregnant. But the whole... I think it was in my head that I thought, 60, you know, what shall I do? Will I be painting? Will I be gardening? Will I be spending more time, you know, with my family? No. Nothing changes.
But there is an expectation, isn't there, that something will change when you reach a certain age. And that's ridiculous, really.
I think it is, but I reckon it's, you know, for me, it was perhaps transferring my own thoughts about my own mother when she became 60, or my grandmother and relatives around me, that this was a special milestone. I don't even know if I've got the words, but it's more a feeling than a reality that something different happens at 60, a bit like back to being 21. Well, it doesn't. It's just another day, and your life continues around you. The people around you rely on you, still rely on you. Nothing actually changes. But I think it was a time for reflection for me. What do I actually want to do? Being mindful that since January this year, I've lost 5 people in my life that have been very, very dear to me. And I think that's the reality, especially as 3 of them have been younger than me. It's how do we ensure that we don't waste what time we have, and that we think more clearly about the legacy we leave.
I mean, do you think it's a generational thing as well? I mean, I remember my own mother. She was a primary school teacher, and, you know, in her 50s, she was playing rounders and really enjoying it. And in her generation, you had to retire at 60. And the day she retired, you know, she sort of sat in a chair and she said to me, you know, life kind of finishes at 60 because, you know, that's the end of her professional career. And she really did I think, decline from that point on. So, you know, I think that we have higher expectations. Obviously, we're living longer. I mean, it's a privilege to be healthier for longer and to have more in front of you than you know, on average our parents did. But with that comes also the need to be healthier and to maintain a good sort of work-life balance, but also to go on working, you know, and we have that opportunity now. I think that probably previous generations didn't have in the same way.
I think it's really important, this area of work and the balance. I certainly don't want to be somebody who blocks jobs for other people. I don't think that that's necessarily fair either. But for some people, it's a necessity of life, and we have to get those balances right. But also, the longer we're working, the more we're engaged in something gameful and that we can enjoy. And I do think that there becomes more choice about perhaps enjoying it, or at least from my perspective, there is now, with pensions and things kicking in, that choice means that you can choose what you do.
Yes.
Rather than feel you have to do something. Now, I've not had that opportunity really, because having been a whistleblower and finding myself sort of employably homeless. Now, I'm not sure how much of that was in my head and how much of it was real, but I certainly felt very sort of cut off from my previous life. But what I've built with the support of many brilliant people, including, I have to say, you, is a community that understand each other, embrace the changes, but well, we obviously have to talk about so many people who get caught in this whistleblowing space who then cannot work again because of the impact on their health. I'm not saying that's all age related, but I'm certainly worried about the age, or rather the life limiting impact that will have on people. So that I always encourage people to start treating the whistleblowing journey like their job, treat it professionally, try and take the emotion out, and also look at the opportunities and doors that opened. You know, I, as you've heard me say before, I was so surprised. You know, I thought, gosh, what am I going to do? And everyone said, you'll never be able to do this. Whistleblowers can't get on. Well, I've proved that they do get on. We don't all get on. We don't all agree on the same thing. But that's the same in anything that you do. But what we have is this. You can do something different. So for me, I think this sort of age thing that we're talking about here crept up on me sooner through enforced change, and finding something and gave me the chance to think, what can I do that will really make a difference? There might be a legacy, something that my family can think, you know, that's something I'm proud of. My mum did something really useful. And I don't think anybody, and I can't speak for men and I've never understood them, but in terms of the women I know, I would say that most of us are looking for that thing at this sort of point in our lives, and saying, what are we sharing with our family, with our children in particular, and how do we prepare them for what's coming? Because we never talked about things like menopause. Certainly I didn't with, you know, my family. It was a taboo subject, but everyone's talking about it now, along with many other medical problems. So I believe that we're living in a new enlightenment, especially for women, but I actually worry for men. I feel that they're somehow being slightly lost in the argument. And that worries me. But it's new.
Yes, I mean, do you think that that as you get older, you have a stronger sense of, I guess, sort of wanting to leave the world a better place, you know, than when you found it? And I mean, the great thing about whistleblowing, and why I felt drawn to be part of this community, I mean, I guess I've been whistleblowing for a very long time in different guises, but the key thing is that in having a community of whistleblowers, the isolation of individuals that speak up about certain issues is removed. And you know, I mean, famously we saw it with the post office scandal and Horizon, that the key tactic to try and silence, I guess, you know, all those sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses was to say, it's only your problem. Nobody else has been affected, and the isolation of the whistleblower is a key aspect that that Whistleblowers UK is sort of the antidote to, almost.
Antidote. I love that term. I'm going to be using it so much more. I think, again, nothing we've done has been really deliberate. I have to thank Tom Lloyd, who himself has hit 70 and he's just recovering from his second knee replacement. But his perspective, again, as somebody who had retired at the time that we started all of this off, and being very forward-looking about, you know, setting meaningful aims and objectives and a vision, mission and value that put the whistleblower at the centre of things in terms of how we treated them, really opened my eyes up to being responsible for people in a very different way to the way that it was when I was working, more holistically. And I think running an NGO you feel that you do have your heart's in it as much as your head. So going back to that thought, the legacy issue is probably something that we all have a moment in our life. I don't think it's necessarily hitting 60, but I think it's just something happens that makes you reassess what you've done and what you're going to do going forward and how you're going to do it. So learning, using the past to shape the future. I heard that a long time ago, and I've used it a lot over the years. In fact, before I even had my sort of, my Damascene moment, but it really meant something when that happened, and sitting back and thinking, well, I can be I can just sink into this, I can feel isolated, or do what I genuinely in my heart knew. I can't be the only one, because we all speak up every day, but it only goes wrong for some people. Now, the postmasters is a brilliant example. And the reason they've succeeded, exactly like the 7 doctors in the Lucy Letby case, which is also in the press at the moment, they succeeded because they stuck together. Yeah. And the playbook is about separating people, isolating them. And once you do that, people do get lost. So keeping them all together, Whistleblowers' main aim really is about the sort of psychologically safe space. Doesn't mean we all agree with each other all the time, and doesn't mean people don't fall out, because they're all different personalities. We have to respect that. But we've been very clear about what our vision, mission, and values are, and even though people dip in and dip out, they're always welcome back. We don't have this grudge holding or anything else, because if we can't stick together as whistleblowers, what are we going to do? People like Lee Castleton, who I hope you're also going to be interviewing soon, who's joined us from the post office group and is endorsing what we're doing and saying, you've got to stick together. Forget this, there are no divides. So within age, I think, I'm hoping that ultimately I end up living in a community like my father-in-law did, where I can still keep my mental capacity going and my physical energy and my joy for life. Yes. And whatever happens next, keep people together.
Yes. I mean, I do think that there is the huge positive of getting older is that you reach a point where you don't really care what people think. Yes. And you kind of, who you are, what your values are, and you've got nothing to lose by saying, no, I don't agree, or this isn't right. Where, if you're sort of mid-career and you're sort of hoping for a promotion or hoping that you'll stay in the same company for the next 20 years, it's a lot more difficult to speak out. And I think that, possibly the baby boomer generation, we already were quite courageous in our 20s. So, we're only getting more confident and more willing to speak out, and with possibly less to lose. And I think that makes us quite a formidable generation.
I think that this whole thing about confidence and knowing who you are, and even down to things like body image, does it really matter? Yeah. Yes, a lot of people are sort of struggling. It's a bit like the Bridget Jones, climbing back up the post, that fireman's pole thing again. Sometimes you just got to say, I'm just getting down. I don't care. Yeah. And I'm readjusting my undies, and so what if they're really big? There has to be that point in time where we just say, if we worry so much about what other people think, we're never going to do anything. You're absolutely frozen. But once you start, it's liberating. For me, it's really been that moment of liberation. My aunt talks about burning a bra and all of that stuff. Heaven forbid. The bra companies are... But it's that sort of equivalent, isn't it? We're just going to say, well, let's have the discussion. If we disagree, let's disagree. But if we don't have the discussion, nothing will change. Yes. And if it takes being a bit older to have the courage to follow it through and not be bothered about what other people say, but actually embrace the fact that they're even prepared to say it to you, and you challenge it back. Because we hear awful things, lots of stuff about woke. Frankly, I'm still not totally sure I understand what it really means. But if it means listening to and trying to put yourself in the place of somebody else, I think it's a good thing. Doesn't mean I'm going to agree with it. It's not going to mean that I would choose to do certain things, a different way for having tried it. But if I haven't tried it, I don't know.
Well, absolutely. And I think the other side of woke, though, is that not willing to listen to anybody that doesn't share politically correct views. And to me, freedom of speech is really important. And so, I will listen to people that I fundamentally, profoundly disagree with, because they have a right to express their opinion. Yeah. But I have a right to profoundly disagree with their opinion and express my own opinion. And I think that goes to the heart of our, democratic principles. And I think sometimes we've got to a stage where unless you are on the right script, that you're cancelled, and that to me doesn't make any sense at all. It's actually a very dangerous place to be as a society if we try and sort of filter what's good and what's bad and what's right. And I think certainly for individuals that are prepared to stand up and say, no, not in my name, life has become quite difficult at times.
Yeah, it really has. Within our organisation, we've got Victoria McLeod, who's just stepped down from the judiciary, and many people have been really hostile towards her as a transsexual woman. But actually, I think we have to stop looking at what's in somebody's pants and start considering what's coming out of their mouth and what's in their brain. And it's such a distraction. I've seen it with so many different people that they are sidelined, not that Victoria is, but sidelined into this area and then pigeonholed.
Yes.
And it's part of the playbook, and those exact same things happen to whistleblowers all the time. It's I know I talk about it. It's probably boring now, but the cycle of abuse that we signpost people to, that we not discovered, but I think put into words for Whistleblowers UK is fundamentally everyone knows. There's never a time when somebody else doesn't know that something that's wrong or immoral is happening, and then just whatever reason. Might be turning 60. You say, today's the day I'm going, I'm going to do something about this. This is ridiculous. Yeah. Why hasn't the manager done something? Why hasn't somebody done something? And when you sort of make it formal, it's almost like the switch flicks. Only not to an on light, it's to an off light. Yes. And what whistleblowers have described over the years, and as you know, we've examined over 4,500 pieces of evidence, that people sort of say, I felt quite a weight lifted from my shoulders, and that's to paraphrase many people, when I disclosed what I disclosed. And I thought the person I told was equally concerned. They wanted to do something. Yes. And of course, what happens then, all of a sudden, and it's instinct, and I do hope that with all of these evolutionary changes that we never lose our fight or flight, because we need to listen to it more. Because if you think something has changed, it has. And it doesn't take being frozen out of meetings or not invited to somebody's birthday party to know. It's somewhere instinctively inside us that something is different.
Why do you think it is that the vast majority of people don't have the courage to stand up and be counted? Because I've encountered it personally that the person who is prepared to identify the problem and speak out about it is ostracised by the rest of the group, of the company, and they're made to be the villain of the piece. And yet their colleagues all know that that's not the truth, and they're right. What is it in human instinct that is it just fear? Is it self-preservation that means that the people who know the right thing to do are the minority and are find themselves in a very difficult position always?
I think I'd offer a slightly different view on this. If everybody who did the right thing was targeted and treated badly, the streets would be paved with them. Most of us speak up all of the time. It's quite normal. But we don't know, in the work context, in the context of the law and the framework we're trying to change, that that's what we're doing and that we are protected. And in most organisations, things get sorted out. It's the exceptions, not the rule. It's when it is somebody feels particularly threatened for whatever reason. It's all the things you've said. I don't think anyone's actually afraid to speak out. They're afraid of the consequences of speaking out when they've seen around them the huge impact that it's had on people. The nurses that we meet that have, another person you really should meet, Catherine Waters, and in fact you've met her, speaking out about the work they do around nurses who are referred to their regulator on fitness to practice grounds. because they've spoken up. Most of them are found to have done nothing wrong. The same with doctors being sent to the GMC. And I'm focusing on health because I think health and age sort of go together really well. But also financial services, age and finances go together really well. And we see the people who are speaking up about mis-selling, about fraud, about cyber, about the misuse of AI, they are being ostracised by the organisations where other people know. I think it's about reputation. Yeah. Dare I say Westminster, now you're leaving. Look at what's happened over there. Yeah. Going back to Boris, which really did upset the apple cart across the Conservative Party. And as you know, I'm just apolitical. I will support whoever supports the legislation we want to bring through, frankly, because it's about doing the right thing and it's a cross-party issue. But if, for instance, Boris Johnson had stood on the doorstep of number 10 and said, I got this really wrong. And what I've learnt from this is that whistleblowers don't know what to do in this country. We are going to change that. We're going to put it right. And I'm going to offer the country my, unreserved apology. But I don't want this to get in the way of the challenges that we are tackling. And we want to get to the end of this parliament. Forgive me at the end, but let me get on with the job now. I think people would be so much more, forgiving. They would have moved on.
Yes.
It's never going to change the fact that what happened at Partygate, where people were, not allowed to see their relatives in hospital or in nursing homes, it's always going to be unforgivable. But there's an element of it that you can say, well, he's only human.
Yes.
And those people who did this were only human, because there were lots of them that didn't speak up. They went to the parties. They knew they weren't supposed to be there. So it wasn't just the MPs. And we saw the same with Keir Starmer and, was it Beer and Pizzagate or something? But when you're doing these jobs, and it was the same for people, having parties in their gardens. He wasn't the only one, although he didn't set a very good example. I'm not trying to excuse it. I think I'm trying to find an explanation for it. Yeah. And again, the age factor, there are plenty of people around with the experience to know that everyone is going to find this very distasteful.
You're right. And I mean, I have myself experienced a lack of emotional intelligence, I think, in some of the way the people in Westminster have behaved. That certainly Partygate is a classic example. An early apology, I think, would have put to bed the, what followed, because, everybody saw Boris Johnson as a sort of fallible human being who was like them, and everybody struggled with lockdowns and things. So if he'd said, this is really bad and I'm really sorry and I've made a big error of judgment early on, I think the outcome would have been quite different. But politics has never been about, for the political classes, I would say, about fundamentally sort of owning up to the truth. And I think people are maybe, we've got to the point where people are very disappointed with the way they are treated, and the fact that the truth is sometimes a foreign country in Westminster,
Yeah.
So I certainly listened to the Prime Minister saying that we must make sure that the contaminated blood scandal never happens again, or the Horizon scandal never happens again. And that is a soundbite, I think, probably, spoken quite sincerely, and by Keir Starmer as well, and by David. Everybody said we must make sure this never happens again. But you have to do something. Exactly. To make sure it never happens again. Exactly. And that's why I think Whistleblowers UK has a huge role to play in, shifting the dial so that it's a lot easier to make sure it never happens again. But,
Yeah. Well, for me on that, I've seen a huge amount of skullduggery across the Westminster estate, which frankly leaves me chilled. No wonder I don't particularly support any party. We've worked really hard on areas like ensuring the government took on the challenge of the whistleblowing framework review, but it's just been kicked into the long grass. Everybody speaks, and I think in Westminster people forget that it's a great big gossip factory. And if you're doing something like the stuff I'm doing, people come and talk to you. and you know exactly who's, practically, where somebody's changed their shoes at times if it's a contentious issue. Now, it doesn't mean to say I go running to teacher and I keep everything really close to my chest and look for an opportunity to hopefully persuade somebody to do the thing they've promised to do. And
you're listening to Nothing But a Number, the podcast that looks at age and ageing with a wide array of fabulous guests. We've got some brilliant guests coming in the next few weeks, and if you want to be notified when the next upload is, please subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll tell you exactly what's coming next.
Wiping off the criminal convictions of the postmasters, all well and good. But for everybody who spoke up, and more than 48 whistleblowers who've come forward from Fujitsu who daren't go forward because they're frightened of what will happen to them, there is no safety net. Yeah. And we need that legislation to come forward, be it with them, or we're really delighted to see that Ed Davey and the Liberal Democrats have wholeheartedly committed to the proposals that we put forward, including the Office of the Whistleblower, as part of big political reform. We need to see all parties grappling with that.
I mean, do you think that the culpability of those who turned a blind eye also needs to be addressed?
Yeah, it does, and that's really why we've put that into the bill, because you've got to protect the whistleblowers, but protecting them is actually taking them out and reassuring them something is happening. When I've heard whistleblowers called many things, including nuts and all the rest of it, but they're not. But the thing does drive people mad. I know myself, when I'm trying to get answers out of people, I could quite happily bang my head on this table and get more sense. The whistleblowers in all of this will be, if we move them out, we get the Office of the Whistleblower in place, who are responsible for ensuring that investigations happen, not doing it. We pay lots of regulators, we pay police forces, give them the job, and then hold the people to account. The cost of these inquiries is obscene and unnecessary and takes years, and nobody ever agrees with all of the outcomes. If you look at the blood scandal and Sir Brian is somebody who I greatly admire in terms of the way he's positioned his findings. But, there's lots of, as in with the inquiry into child abuse, there's lots of dead people, dead people who are accountable. I'm afraid that doesn't wash with me. It doesn't wash with the public. And it certainly doesn't wash with the whistleblowers that within the community I'm so proud to, be a part of. So we have got to have more serious and rapid. We need agility. Yes. We need something that identifies these trends coming through. One or two coming into the Office of the Whistleblower Postmasters. You'd think it's one or two. 10, 20, 500? You couldn't turn a blind eye to even 50.
I mean, time is a really important issue, isn't it? Because when you look at all the major scandals of recent years, it's a 20-year period of from when somebody first flagged up that there was a problem to some sort of resolution, but and even not a final resolution at that point. And government's approach is always to commission a review or some higher thing that takes years, and then it felt to me always as kind of kicking the can down the road.
Exactly.
And that doesn't help the victims. It doesn't help a change of behaviour of the whether it's the NHS or local authorities or the post office, universities, absolutely. So what would you say needs to happen in terms of speeding things? The Office of the Whistleblower, but as you say, the investigation still sits with the regulator, and the regulator has, in many cases, not proved to be particularly effective.
They haven't, but I don't totally blame the regulator for that. It's the statutory instruments around it. It's what powers they actually have or don't have. And as you recall from some of the regulators we've spoken to, they actually say, let's have an Office of the Whistleblower. Yeah. When Andrew Bailey was the chief exec at the FCA, he said, why don't you just put it in the top floor of this building? And I don't think he was totally joking.
Yeah.
It's this kind of thing that people are crying out for. There's nobody that came to us and said, no, it wouldn't be a good idea. Because what we don't have across the regulators is a standardisation. I can tell you, everyone's great at reading the Google, what is whistleblowing? Oh, it's a disclosure of information. And you say, well, you've proved that you can read, but what does it mean? How do you incorporate this into the work you do? And it's not simple because, let's face it, regulators get inquiries like ombudsman from everybody, whether they're employers, or workers under the legislation. All of that has been great for lawyers. Let's see, what's happening in the high courts about the lawyers involved with the Horizon project, with all the stuff on NDAs that Maria Miller's been leading on. It's all lawyers who are facilitating this. We haven't even turned our attention yet to the insurance companies. Yes. And I'm hoping that will come. But fundamentally, people seem to be spending more time and energy involved in the cover-up. And who is it said, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. Mm. Going back to how I started this with, with Boris, it was very much the cover-up that did for him.
Yes. And it's interesting. I used my last opportunity as a PMQ to use parliamentary privilege to name and shame an insurance company, and within a matter of hours they'd issued legal letters to every news media outlet, anybody that might have printed a story about it, and somebody said to me, well, wouldn't it have been cheaper for them to have settled what was going to be a relatively small claim? And the answer is no, because they've been doing this to thousands of people, and since then there's been more evidence coming out of more people, and it is exactly the same modus operandi of you tell each individual claimant that actually it's just you, it's only you, and yet the regulator doesn't have, or has the power to look holistically at these cases, but doesn't feed back to the individual. So the individual feels nobody cares, my case is irrelevant, and they suffer an awful lot of kind of emotional upset because it feels so personal, and they feel so powerless, and that's what's got to change.
It's about power. Yeah. It's about driving cultural change, which includes not talking about being professionally, inquisitive, but actually being inquisitive. You cannot keep allowing the same old excuses to be rolled out. And I hope that the one thing that Sir Alan Bates has achieved in all of his work and his 20 years, and I please don't want to be doing this for 20 years. Please no. 12 so far. Let's make this year the year it finishes. Yeah. And perhaps I can think about painting. But yes, we have to come back to this area where regulators are held to account too. Yeah. The whole golden thread of accountability is fractured in far too many places. The emphasis under the current situation is on the whistleblower to be judge, jury, investigator, executioner, prosecutor, whatever it may be. And it shouldn't be. So they're stepping to one side and making excuses, even within the regulators. Come and talk to us. Yes, well, we're doing this. We're doing a review. How many more reviews do we need? Yeah, we have to, and I think that has to be led by government, whichever colour is in charge, saying this has got to stop. This is just another gravy train.
Yes. I mean, they're doing reviews. It's pretty much on every topic where they don't want to take action. It's kind of the review. I did a lot of work on healthy living and obesity, and I mean, every government for the last 30 years had done a review on obesity and developed an obesity strategy and everything, which they never got to implement. And then the next government that came in started another review, and nothing has happened over that period. And you go, well, I mean, apart from anything else, what a waste of taxpayers' money. I mean, because these reviews come at a cost, don't they?
They do. And I think you've hit on a really key thing here, because I've been listening, and I'm a bit of a nerd politically, so I read all of the manifestos from cover to cover within hours of them coming out. As soon as it's out, I'm there scanning through, making notes. And the one thing I've seen in all of them, they all keep telling us what the problems are. Yeah. And how much more investment is needed. If you look at singly, the cost of fraud to every single taxpayer in this country we know is around 350 billion. It's numbers you can't even imagine. And on average, about 190 billion. You know, the National Crime Agency tell us that there are over 350,000 people involved in serious organised crime. If we stop this and we put our resources into stopping the crime in the first place, actually, those public services that have been starved, or and you know, I don't know how true that is. I think a lot of money goes in, but if we stop the fraud,
yes,
it's estimated by the National Audit Office and NHS to be about £46 billion. That's a massive chunk of its budget. But the entire cost of fraud would fund our NHS, and then the money that would free up would be greater investment, further investment in education, all of the big areas that keep, you know, that make Great Britain great. And I have to say, I think we might be losing the great in the way that we're performing at the moment. So I would like to see, in terms of political emphasis, more honesty, you know, and questioning why are regulators spending more time doing reviews and having meetings and going on away days, whatever it may be, and they're not actually prosecuting. Because I'm frustrated. Could you give us some more evidence on this? Why am I giving it to you? When it's your job to do this. You know, I had the MOD when we were dealing with a really serious case, and the Permanent Secretary has written to me thanking us for the work that we've done, because it's prevented a major risk to UK security. Now, I can't talk about the elements, but just to get that letter demonstrates quite how serious this was. And the impact of the whistleblowers who came forward, and they refer to them as being courageous and heroic. They shouldn't have needed to be.
Yes.
But what's happened to the people involved in this? Well, a couple of, you know, they've been able to retire. It's the same thing over and over again. We don't see a real sort of cause and effect. There are no consequences. So until we get that part right and we address the losses, we're going to keep having this conversation, and every big opportunity, like the Whistleblowing Framework Review, which was launched on the 27th of March last year, and we still don't have the report, all of those things mean that why would you come forward as a whistleblower when you think what they might confront? And the cost of litigation, it's not a few thousand, it's tens, it's hundreds of thousands in some cases. And at the end, they don't get the costs back. They often get cost orders. Look at Alison McDermott, Sellafield. That should never have been something that she'd lost her job over. They got rid of her because she highlighted what's turned out to be a real pattern of dreadful misogynistic behaviour in that working environment. And of course, all of that means that we have potentially a nuclear security incident just waiting to happen. All of these people are individuals, and they are, as you say with the post office, just one person. But it isn't. There are always more of them that then come forward, get lost in the system. The press, of course, love a story with an underdog fighting back. But that underdog is paying financially, mentally, physically. Their families pay, their friendships pay. And the serious side of this is the only person I hold responsible is the government. They could have done something, they should have done something, and the people who have been let down are rightly cross.
Yes.
Including me.
Yes. And, I mean, have still not got appropriate compensation for all of them. No. Because, I think it's very hard to sort of monetize what's gone on over such a long period. As you say, lives have been lost. And I personally had a sub postmistress contact me who said that how do you know what you've lost over a 20-year period? I mean, I think she closed the post office after maybe 12 years, but the post office kept all the records. So it's impossible for you to prove what the losses were and what and they said unless you can prove it, we can't compensate. So even in these sort of closing phases of wanting to sort things out, life wasn't made simple at all. Do you think that the role of the media, I mean, certainly in the post office, that speeded up the process significantly? The sort of naming and shaming and the the final series that came out, I think, got so much traction that Parliament was kind of forced to take action. I mean, is that the right way to go? I mean, is it, do we have to put things like that into the public domain in such a way that that our parliamentarians are forced to do things that they should be doing anyway?
I think you know my answer to that. Look, all the people I meet, I don't meet anybody who comes to me saying, I want to be in the press. If I do, I'm really immediately worried. But the only way to get action is to get it in the press. Yeah. So is this the tail wagging the dog? Yeah. Should we just elect the media rather than elect parliamentarians? Let's save ourselves a whole load of money and turn Westminster into a museum. The point of this being, parliamentarians, for some reason, we've delegated it to NHS trusts. We've delegated the post office, their own prosecuting authority. Same with the RSPCA. These are all. Well, what are you doing every day? Yeah. I personally think that it was a great experiment, probably, but it's one that's quite clearly fraught with problems. It's caused delay. It's caused, it's added to the 350 billion a year of loss. It's emboldened the crime gangs. Yeah. All of these things. It's emboldened what we can call, I think, these culturally bereft managers and boards. Boards are not taking responsibility. An easy example of all of this is, with banks, the chief exec has to sign to say everybody has done their reattestation every year. And yet we're still seeing cases of, money laundering and dealing with cartels being able to launder money, including through the post office, of course. And we're seeing still the library type actions arising. The sexism in the city report, nothing gets done. No. It's just far too delegate down the line, far too many pairs of hands, becomes Chinese whispers. As you say, you can't get to the person. Using your postmaster or mistress example, they couldn't get their records. And for people who do keep their records, the aggressive litigation that you saw when you raised the insurance company issue, that's what happens to whistleblowers. Yes. I got arrested because I was handing over evidence to the police of child abuse in a school. Arrested for doing that because the school didn't like it, that I had that evidence had found its way to me. Yeah. I hadn't blacked up, climbed under the fence and broken in. It was sent to me anonymously. But rather than being concentrating on that, they're concentrating on the school raising a concern about it. Yes. And as you know, I don't usually talk about this, but it brings it back home to the point you're making. Who is in charge? Yes. And government has to be in charge. And I hope that as Labour come in, they take note, because they have got plenty of their own failings. They've had, over the course of the time they've been in opposition, they've had issues with whistleblowers in the Labour Party and huge amounts of compensation, and they've challenged. Again, put it right first. Yeah. I think the Liberal Democrats have had a few issues too. I recall seeing. So you're not immune, we're all human. Yes. And every organisation is full of human beings. Things go wrong. But I think the strength of them is how they deal with it when it goes wrong. I'm thinking as I'm listening to you talking that we started off the conversation with, 60 doesn't matter. But I think that in many ways the maturity of your understanding of the world does come from a life well lived and your personal experiences. And I do think that we undervalue people's backstories, people's lived experience. We value it in some ways, in sort of notionally that if somebody's been homeless, they can talk about homelessness with more authority. But having reached 60, or Mike is 71, you've lived a life, and within that life have had so many different experiences that kind of inform the person you are today. So I think that it is an important milestone. I always end my chats with people on two questions. The first one is, what advice would you give to your much younger self? To trust my instinct. And when you actually identify somebody who is doing the wrong thing, rather than try and, be friendly with them. I'll give you my husband's his advice. He said, the one thing you did wrong was you were so nice to everybody. You were so reasonable. And he was in the background saying, kick them when they're down. No. I'm sure it's just a mistake. The instincts, perhaps I'll trust the instincts of my husband would be the advice to my younger self. But if more of us were less polite, perhaps it's a British thing, or less wanting to believe that our values are shared by everybody, that's the bit I would question. Yeah. Sometimes being more assertive rather than more understanding. That would be my advice to my younger self.
Final question, do you have a bucket list? And if so, what's on it?
Oh gosh, you know something? I really haven't had time to plan it, but I'm hoping that my middle daughter's going to announce, a happy announcement soon about getting married. And my husband's never been to Australia. I loved it. So on my bucket list is to take him to Australia to walk his daughter down the aisle. So that would really be, for me, successful life and seeing my children successful, and really hoping that I suppose for my bucket list, it's more whatever opportunity comes to me, I'm not going to put it off. I'm going to do it in the moment and not prevaricate.
Fantastic. Georgina, thank you so much. I think we've had a really full conversation and given people a lot to think about.
And I want to thank you for inviting me and also for joining the board at Whistleblowers UK. Thank you, Jo.
Thank you.